Thank you for coming to today's event. My name is Michael Kugelman. I'm the South Asia Program Associate for the Wilson Center's Asia Program. And before I forget, just wanted to thank the co-sponsors for our event today. They would be the Wilson Center's Environmental Change and Security Program and also the Global Health Initiative. So thank you to the two of them. No one in this audience needs to be convinced of the saliency of debates about international aid programs in Pakistan. Given events of the last few weeks, in particular, there's much talk about so much money has been sent to Pakistan, yet with so little to show for it. And in recent days alone, there have been several reports published, one from the Center for Global Development, another from the Congressional Research Service about U.S. civilian assistance to Pakistan. Some of you may know that the Wilson Center has convened its own working group to examine U.S. civilian aid effectiveness in Pakistan. Today's speaker is a member, as am I, and several others in the audience. We'll be releasing our own recommendations in due course. Today, though, we'll be highlighting another contribution to this debate. Samia Altaf's new book, So Much Aid, So Little Development, Stories from Pakistan, which is available for sale outside, and with Father's Day coming up, there couldn't be a better gift, so you should keep that in mind. It's quite an impressive product, in my view. It's at times poignant, at other times it's tragic, it's disturbing, though always engaging, and often quite amusing, though in a perverse sort of way. But I think its greatest strength lies in its on-the-ground chronicling of international aid development and implementation in Pakistan, based on Samia's own on-the-ground experiences. So it really humanizes the process in a way that we rarely see. So I think that should be applauded. About Samia, she is, as many of you know, by training a physician and a public health specialist. She was formerly the senior advisor to the Office of Health in the USAID mission in Islamabad in Pakistan, and it was that work she did there that's chronicled in her book. Her career is focused on the management and coordination of complex health delivery systems for low-income populations. She's also been on the faculty at the Aga Khan University Medical College. She served as a primary healthcare program officer for UNICEF, and she served as a consultant. But most importantly, she was the Wilson Center's Pakistan Scholar not too long ago in 2007 and 2008. So it's great. It's always great to have her back, and particularly on this happy occasion for the release of a book that's not particularly happy, but the occasion is happy. So I will stop talking and turn the floor over to Samia.
Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for coming here. I'd really like to thank the Wilson Center. I feel it's been a place that has nurtured me, and I feel very warmly embraced by the Wilson Center and the Asia program. So thank you very much. And to the other colleagues and friends in the Wilson Center, my very special thanks goes to Lindsay, because she insisted that I tell her the stories about Pakistan. So over many coffee and tea and lunches, she and I talked about it. And she insisted on this because it was her right as a taxpayer US citizen to understand what was happening to her money. I would like to thank also the Environment Change and Security Program and the Global Health Initiative, and a very special thanks to Wilson Center Press, who have shepherded this book through its many iterations. So Joe, thank you very much. The world of aid is a very strange place, as we all know. And the language we use to talk about it is not equipped to capture this strangeness. Now it has reached such a level of complexity that nothing we say in aid speak conveys the reality of what goes through the minds of those involved in designing and implementing aid programs. If you think about it, the aid world is actually its own land. It is populated by flesh and blood human beings with lofty dreams, petty prejudices, and mundane practical needs. Here the thoughts, ideas, beliefs, assumptions of the program designers have to be interpreted and implemented by people whose thoughts, ideas, beliefs, and assumptions can be quite different from the program designers. There we find personal aspirations, women's status, and economic incentives interacting with large sums of soft money to yield outcomes that are so patently counterproductive, yet so patiently tolerated. How then does one capture this complexity? How does one fit the many disparate pieces to get to a larger picture? You know, when things become complicated, people tell each other stories. People tell stories to make sense of the world around them and to find their own place in it. And then one discovers the difference between what things are and what they appear to be, and where one stands. So here are my aid stories. These are from inside the black box of Pakistan's healthcare sector to show what lies in the shadows. This story of the Social Action Program, a case study of an $8 billion program, which was partly funded by the World Bank, it was a soft loan, developed and implemented by the government of Pakistan from 1993 to 2003, examines a typical development project to determine reasons for its failure. I and a fellow consultant, a Canadian woman whom I refer to in the book as Lucy Mem Sahab, were the technical experts who helped prepare part of the SAP proposal. This proposal preparation exercise is the narrative. It describes the institutions, local and international, but mostly the Pakistani institutions, the decay in one, the malaise and arrogance of the policymakers in another, the corruption and nepotism perpetrated in broad daylight, and the push and pull factors outside their control in almost all the institutions. The final chapter recounts the persistent, unbroken, relentless beat of donor support that still goes on today. The basic story is the familiar one. Pakistan has been receiving foreign aid for the last many decades, yet social sector indicators, if not worse, have not improved. Corruption is only part of the explanation. While people may be pocketing some of the money, this cannot explain the large-scale failure of aid. Deeper into the story, we understand that the programs fail because of the mismatch between the design in Washington or London and the reality on the ground in Pakistan. For example, donors keep funding training programs to increase capacity of Pakistan's human capital, yet trained personnel keep leaving the country to work in the Middle East, Western Europe, or United States. Those implementing the programs know this, but because donors give funds for training, they keep proposing more training programs. Even Lucy Mem Sahab, an outsider who knows nothing about Pakistan, realizes through her encounters with those in charge that the design of the development programs don't make sense. Initially, she fights against this, but eventually she too joins the bandwagon. This walk through the aid land, tied to a multi-billion-dollar aid-funded health program, had turned the world upside down for me. It was as if, like Alice, I had gone through the rabbit hole and entered a world that to me seemed irrational. But just as in Wonderland, to the denizens of aid land, the rules made perfect sense because they are in their best interest. Hence, they insist on working and living by those rules. You know, even the real-life characters of aid land had an uncanny resemblance to those in Wonderland. There were the Mad Hatters with their interminable tea parties, and the Red Queen who insisted I play the game as she dictated and threatened to off my head when I did not. And like the dodo, everyone felt entitled to a prize even when they did not win. There were those in aid land who wanted recommendations first, analysis afterwards. And I too, like Alice, insisted that this does not make sense. You know, there was the queen in Alice in Wonderland who insists, sentence first, verdict later. Even Lucy Memsab, though seduced by this aid land in the end, had started out saying, this does not make sense. At the end of this exercise, I was not the same person who had started at the beginning. It was in grappling with this very disorienting experience that I began to suspect something even more radical. Perhaps it was not the aid world that was upside down. Perhaps I had been looking at it standing on my head. Could it be that we all have been, and maybe still are, looking at it standing on our heads? Could that be why we could do so little in spite of trying so much? Could that be why the more we try to fix it, even today, the more it crumbles in our hands? So, to be able to hold it and to fix it, we need to diagnose the problem, because there is a very big problem. To do that, we need to reconstruct the aid world the way it truly is, even though it would be different from the one we think we know and that we take for granted. This book, I hope, helps to do that. Here is my reconstruction of the aid world. The underlying systemic problem why donor-supported programs fail is an inappropriate program design. A design that is out of context of local implementation realities, is based on skewed incentives and mutually rewarding interdependent alignments between the program planners, managers, and implementers. The book captures the architecture of this aid nexus to help diagnose the systemic underlying pathology. This nexus is comprised of 6 groups of actors, 4 visible and 2 invisible. The visible ones are the donor agency, the international contractors, the local subcontractors or the NGOs, and the government of Pakistan bureaucracy or the national government bureaucracy in any country. The invisible but critical ones are the Pakistani citizens and the taxpayers of the donor country. These 2 actors really are not on the stage, while the first 4 are on the stage, and they are the ones who we see. This relationship amongst the visible 4 is very finely aligned and works smoothly. Donors disperse funds. The local government, the government of Pakistan in this case, is happy to receive the money. Contractors, mostly for-profit businesses, implement the activities, and NGOs find a source of revenue in this partnership in a country where sources of revenue are very limited. The incentives of these 4 are aligned in keeping the aid cycle moving and spending the money. That is how they all stand to gain. So they do just that. Usually, there are no consequences of how funds are spent, but there are serious consequences if the money is not spent in the assigned time period. The incentives and the relationships for these 4 actors are configured in such a manner that no single actor can suggest a change, even if they know that the program is not working. Given this incestuous relationship, ineffective program designs are perpetuated. In case of SAP, even though it was very clear early on that the program was not working, it continued to receive support from the World Bank and from the government of Pakistan. The 2 invisible actors are the Pakistani citizens, the ultimate beneficiaries of this whole exercise, and the taxpayer in the donor countries. These are the only 2 that have the most at stake and an interest in changing this cozy, mutually beneficial relationship. But Pakistani citizens have no voice or place at the table, and the taxpayer in developed countries are usually not aware of the details. Recently, under pressure from vocal groups who have started asking for evaluations and what is happening to donor support, the donors in Pakistan had started holding stakeholder meetings, which are basically more form than content. Unequal status of stakeholders, even just the ability to speak English, can easily shape the outcome of such meetings. Taxpayers in donor countries expect their regulatory agencies, such as the Government Accounting Office in US, to see that their tax dollar is used as intended. These regulators monitor utilization of funds through reports submitted by donors themselves. For example, the GAO asked USAID for reports on the spending in Pakistan. There is no review of effectiveness or appropriateness. Genuine third-party evaluations are extremely rare. Most of the third-party evaluations are usually funded by the funding agency or by their contractors. And that, the reality of the aid world, should be the basis of program design. That should be the platform from which to think how to reconfigure funding and programs through the Kerry-Lugar bill so that US assistance to Pakistan makes a whole lot more sense than it has done in the past. We owe that much, at least, to the US taxpayer and to the citizens of Pakistan. Here, I would like to stop for read a brief excerpt from the book. The book is basically chapters which describe a particular institution in the health and population welfare, health and population sectors of Pakistan. So this chapter, in this chapter, Lucy Memsab, my fellow consultant, and I have gone to visit Mrs. S., who's the director of the Pakistan Nursing Council. Pakistan Nursing Council is a federal body in charge of regulating, certifying, and registering the nurses and other paramedical staff in Pakistan. So Mrs. S then tells us about some of the problems at the Pakistan Nursing Council, including their difficulty in retaining trained manpower, or woman power in this case. So I am going to read from this chapter, which is called the Pakistan Nursing Council, A Dead End. And when we raise so the chapter has a lot more details. I will just read from this section, which I have entitled The Vanishing Nurses. And we ask her about the nurses leaving the country to go work outside. And so we have this conversation with her. Lucy Memsab, my fellow consultant, I, and Mrs. S., who's the director of the Pakistan Nursing Council. You have mentioned that nurses leave the country at the first opportunity. Is that a major problem? I start the conversation. Oh, yes, it is a terrible loss. Mrs. S.'s voice has genuine feeling. Our own country desperately needs the manpower, but what can we do? All governments can stop qualified personnel from leaving the country, says Lucy Memsab. The government can actually mandate this. Lucy Memsab, for the life of her, cannot understand why it is so difficult for a government to control the exodus of its trained woman power, especially since that training has been financed either by taxpayers or by other government-funded programs. All government servants who wish to leave the country need to obtain a no-objection certificate from the government, and then they can go wherever they like, Mrs. S. tells us. Most of the time, people are granted this certificate. Aha, Lucy Memsab pounces on this opening. Then the government can refuse to give this document to people it thinks are needed in this country. And it is clear nurses are essential personnel. But why do it? Mrs. S. asks patiently and sincerely. As it is, there are not enough jobs in the country to absorb all the qualified nurses. They go, for they too have families to take care of. She looks to me for understanding. They work for some years on short-term contracts, and after they have made enough money to build a house, educate a brother, or collect a dowry for themselves or for a daughter, then they come back. And then Mrs. adds, after a brief pause, in fact, it is better to let them go. Otherwise, they create trouble for us. Later on, we shall meet another senior government official in the Provincial Health Department of Punjab who also voices exactly the same feeling. His office was training peripheral health workers under a project called the Family Health Project, which was being funded at that time by the Asian Development Bank. And the objective was to overcome the shortage of qualified personnel in Pakistan's rural health system. This project director also hoped that once his personnel were trained, they would go to the Middle East. Government officials even share a common vocabulary, and he will use Mrs. S's exact words. He did not want these workers to create trouble for the government of Punjab. The international assistance actually pays for the training programs. So it funds the training, the housing during the training, the stipends during the training, the curriculum, the training material, but it does not pay for the salaries of these workers or deploys these workers anywhere. And they expect the local government to utilize these workers because this is part of the capacity building that the international donors do. But in reality, the local governments do not have the capacity to deploy, pay, and utilize the new trained workforce. Senior government officials are then left to hope that trained personnel who can be demanding and vocal and can create trouble will just go away. This exodus runs contrary to the objectives of the program, but it still relieves the government of blame for not utilizing the trained workers. Although people are aware of this situation, but policymakers and development experts continue to design the same kind of training programs. The programs bring in large amount of funds for the government, and the government feels under pressure to run them. As the same officer who wished away his workers to the Middle East would say in relation to my comments on this subject, what can we say, Dr. Sahiba? These World Bank people, they are very fond of trainings. We have to comply if we are to get any money. Pakistan has been a recipient of donor assistance for many programs, such programs many times, but international technical experts do not try to figure out how the workers produced by the government might be used. In unstable regimes, program administrators who are often political appointees with little accountability and slim hope for long tenure in their jobs have neither much interest in doing this nor any idea of how it might be accomplished. Or their hands are tied because programs developed outside the country bind the funding to specific activities. Most program evaluations, which usually are conducted in-house by donor agencies, rate these training programs as successes because there is a tangible product that can be measured. So many thousands community health workers trained, so many thousands midwives trained. So those are tangible outputs. The local managers are also happy because they reap personal benefits, a special remuneration, a project vehicle, a trip to the donor country, participation in an extended study tour, and so on. Finally, the lending agencies like the World Bank and the grant-giving agencies like the US Agency for International Development, UK's Department for International Development are happy because they are able to disperse funds in time for the next budget request. Lucy Memsab sees some advantage even in this bizarre situation. Well, once these nurses come back, they are more experienced and thus more valuable. So they can be hired at that time. Oh, no, 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 Mrs. S almost recoils from this suggestion. Now they cannot be hired at all. The government has placed a ban on the re-employment of returning nurses. Any nurse who has worked outside the country in her private capacity cannot work for the government again. But why? Why not? They are more experienced. They are available because, and here Mrs. S seems personally hurt, they have rejected us in the first place. Now why should we accept them? Actually, this ban is not based on sentimentality alone. According to the government service rules, anyone over the age of 35 years of age cannot join the government service in any branch. This has implications for retirement benefits and all of those things. Not enough nurses, not enough jobs. Nurses working as little doctors. Trained nurses being encouraged and coaxed to go out of the country. Untrained and uncertified nurses working in private hospitals. What a strange and paradoxical situation. And actually, this situation applies to all the other 7 cadres of health workers who are expected to work in the Pakistan's health system. Yet, there is no discussion on the central issues that lead us to this place and time and again, and are critical to the success or failure of any larger project. Lucy Memsab shakes her head. This, she says, pointing to the social action program's terms of reference, makes no sense at all. Mrs. S is starting to look restless. She signals to her little peon for tea and snacks. The problem with women, Mrs. S volunteers conversationally, adjusting the dupatta delicately on her hair as the tea is being laid out, is that they all want to get married. Quite a problem, huh? So eventually they must leave the profession to take care of their husbands and children. We decide to let this comment pass and raise another possible solution for this particular problem with women: training male nurses. As a primary wage earners, men would not be compelled to leave once they are married, and they could tend, at least even in this conservative society, to the male patients, leaving the female nurses free to work for women. Not a good idea, according to Mrs. S. And why not? Because men are very unreliable. Gentlemen, take note. As students, they will agitate the girls, she continues, oblivious to the effect of her remark on her audience. If they are in classes together, they will induce them to strike on petty matters. But the girls are under no obligation to listen to the men, Lucy Memsab says. Yes, but the poor girls, they have no choice but to follow the boys. It is natural for them to do so. By themselves, girls never cause us any problems. They quietly do what they are told or get married and go away. Look at what is happening in Liaquat National Hospital, all because of these boys. So much headache these boys are causing us. She strikes her forehead with the palm of her right hand in the traditional gestures of frustration, causing the dupatta to flop off her hair so that it must hastily be retrieved before she can go on. And the girls are not listening to us either. They are naturally listening to the boys. Stupid things. She shakes her dupatta-clad head in indignation at the stupidity of the girls in general. The Liaquat National Hospital in Karachi is one of the few institutions in Pakistan that recruits and trains a certain percentage of male nurses. Almost a third of the entering class is male nurses. During the weeks before our visit to Mrs. S, the nursing students at Liaquat had gone on a strike demanding better living conditions in the student hostel, which of course could be blamed on the presence of male students in the mix. Girls on their own, Mrs. S thinks, would not agitate for such a thing. It is actually not true. I went through an all-female medical college, and we agitated at the drop of a hat for this, that, or the other. Lucy Memsab looks at Mrs. S if she's from another planet. Thankfully, by now, the tea is ready. There are samosas and jalebis and all kinds of wonderful things, and we fall to it with gusto, and Mrs. S very generously has her attendant run out for some mint chutney to go with the samosas, which are really out of this world. So why is this important now? Although the book is specific to SAP, which is a 10-year-old program, it is an example of any development project in any country, and it remains pertinent even today. 8 programs have continued to and are still being designed and implemented in exactly the same fashion. I had first-hand experience of this phenomenon trying to force-fit inappropriately designed programs while working for USAID in Islamabad from 2003 to 2007. And I fear very greatly that the Kerry Lugar Berman funding may meet the same fate. So what does an appropriate program look like? Here is what I think are the basic components of an appropriate program design for Pakistan. I have given much more, I have described this program design and the analysis that goes with it in greater detail at a presentation which I made at George Washington University's Segur Center. And Michael has been very kind to place those outside as a handout. So if you are interested, that gives more details. But just very briefly, because we are running out of time, here is what I think are the basic components of an appropriate program design. Ownership, number one, ownership by the government of Pakistan. Grants or loans should be contingent on program plans prepared by the government of Pakistan and peer-reviewed by international experts to see that they are consistent with the best practices. Everybody who has worked with the bank knows that a lot of times the country strategy for the country is written by World Bank. Individual donors should then be assigned specific sections within the overall sector plan. Pakistan government should coordinate the activities of all the donors. On paper, there's a donor coordination cell within Pakistan's EAD, but like I say, it's on paper. Number two, include implementation constraints upfront in each activity, even at the risk of inefficiencies. This donor practice of cookie-cutter plans that maximize management and maximize management efficiencies should be discouraged. You find these cookie-cutter plans being implemented all over the world, in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, whereas these are all different countries. They have different constraints. They have different challenges. Number three, change in the scale of projects. After successful pilots, programs should be implemented in geographically defined areas, with different donors given responsibility for different geographic areas. There is this practice that every donor works nationally. DFID's program is national, USAID's program is national, JICA's program is national, the Germans are funding national programs. It is just impossible to find out which donor is doing what. And so if the programs are geographically well defined, there is also an inherent element of competition within the donors. Here is this geographical area, this district, or this area which is being implemented by US government funding. And here is this another area which is being implemented by Japanese funding or the funding by the UK government. So there is an inherent competition within that. There should be real-time monitoring and objective oversight. This notion of evaluations after the project is over just doesn't make sense. These are large projects. They go on for many years. And by the time the third party and end of project evaluations happen, half of the people are gone and half of them are moved on to new jobs. So there should be real-time monitoring. Specific project milestones should be announced, and they should be tracked for timely correction. So the milestones should be such that once they are measured, and if they do not appear to be where they should be, this should be cause for rethink and reevaluation of the activity and for mid-course correction if it needs to be done. Number 5, there should be civil society input and oversight on behalf of the citizens. I cannot stress this element enough. I work for the government of District of Columbia, and I basically do more or less the same thing. I help manage and organize services for an entitlement program. We receive funding from the federal government or from the state government, and we utilize that money on behalf of those citizens who cannot afford healthcare services themselves. I cannot tell you how we have to respond constantly to oversight, citizens, civilian watchdog groups, which really is something just wonderful. So civil society inputs and oversights on behalf of citizens. Watchdog groups from academia, media, and other groups need to be supported and given information on all aspects of the program, including program progress, which they should monitor on behalf of the citizens. This is particularly important in countries like Pakistan, where the average citizen really has neither the place nor the voice nor the information about what is actually happening on their behalf. Number 6, there should be independent third-party evaluations on behalf of the taxpayers in donor countries that measure performance. And these should really be third-party evaluations. They should not be funded from the funds of the regulatory agency or the funds of the contractors. I will stop here because I've already gone over my allocated time and see what Michael wants to do next. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And there really wasn't allocated time. There was not an allocated time, but that was fine. Thank you very much, Samia. We're going to open it up to all of you in just a minute. Before we do that, though, let me just exercise my role as the moderator and play the devil's advocate. The broad question I have for you is it really as bad as, is it really all that bad? That's the broad question I want to ask. I want to go back a few years to an article that you wrote in the Wilson Quarterly, the Wilson Center's quarterly journal, in which you essentially laid out a lot of the ideas that appear in the book. You come up with some of the vignettes that are later in the book. So it's the same themes back then. In a subsequent issue of the Wilson Quarterly, there was a letter to the editor submitted by someone who has worked for the Canadian International Development Agency for quite some time, Dorothy Lele. And she wrote a letter which I thought was interesting. I just wanted to read a few sentences from it. And this is what she says. What I have found heartening, in spite of difficulties such as those Altaf describes, is that some people do benefit in the end. Women who have been struggling by themselves for years realize that they can make changes when they form groups and speak out. I learned from one non-governmental agency that it would begin to fight on behalf of the poor for access to modern energy services, a departure from its previous stance. Maybe such small steps cannot justify the amount of money spent, but what is the alternative? Do nothing? So I'd just be curious to get your, I don't want to say your response to that, but just your some input on that issue, on that angle.
Well, some people actually do benefit. So when we say that development programs have failed, at some level they haven't failed because there are some groups and some entities that have benefited greatly. If you look at the aid environment, you find that there are jobs created. You find that there are activities which hire professionals, even in countries like Pakistan, where there would be where opportunities for meaningful work are very few. And of course, the benefit also goes quite a bit to some of the people who are at that time related with the project or are in the net of the project. So there are women who benefit. If you look at these microfinance programs, you find there's a lot of evidence that individuals have benefited from that. So it is true that some individuals and some entities benefit. However, the argument is that what we are trying to do? It is the development assistance actually is not charity. It is the purpose is basically to bring about changes in the host country so that it is able to provide those services on its own. So my question is it able to do that? You look at the case of Pakistan, the report that came out from the Center for Global Development, actually I was stunned to read the figures that almost $100 billion assistance has gone to Pakistan since 1960. And you look at any sector in which that assistance has gone, there is absolutely no impact. How much worse can the health and education sector get to the place where it is? There are those who say, well, these are social sectors. Look at something else. There's some things have been done. This institution was built. Yes, there are. It's not all lost. There are some institutions that have been built. But even if you look at an industry like the Pakistan Railways over the past years has received, money coming out of its ears, but it's continuously deteriorated, and look where it is. So the question is that what our objective is? And the alternatives, of course there are alternatives. We will find alternatives if we think about them. We will find alternatives if we are objective enough to look at our own failures. I mean, in science, failure is as much of a use as success is. So if we want to bring science to our development expertise, we should really look at the failures and see why they have failed and what we can do to improve them. So I disagree with this, that there is no other option but to keep doing that.
Okay, let's open it up to all of you. We'll have a microphone going around, so please wait until it arrives until you ask your question. And please make it a question, singular, and try to keep it brief. So let's start in the back over there.
Hi. I had an idea. It may be crazy, but after we train, we train doctors and nurses to get them to remain in the country, why can't the government give them land to build a house, and that would mean that if they leave, that they leave that behind, and that would be an anchor to anchor them into the society. I mean, is that a possibility?
I mean, I suppose anything can be tried, and I really don't know why the government doesn't give them land. But the issue is, I think, is much more than just land itself. There is the land and a house has to have electricity, has to have water supply, has to have schools, has to have all of those things that human beings need to lead fulfilling lives. So where does that come from? So it's. I think the question is much larger than just a house or a land.
Okay, let's come up front here. So the first question, gentleman right here.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that land. What do those resources come from? Pakistan is a relatively small country. It only has about 63 million hectares of global average biocapacity, and that amount of land normally supports only about 55 million people. And yet Pakistan, I think, is, 170 million, growing to maybe 300 million by 2050. So I guess my question is, you say that the problems are inappropriate design and development programs, but could there be a more fundamental problem that the relationship between the resource needs of 170 million people are just so far out of balance with what's available?
There are countries that are a lot smaller than Pakistan, and they are able to sustain standard of living for their population, which is better than Pakistan. So I don't think this is, land and the equation and how much is supported for what is not my area of expertise. But I will go back to the question that you raised, that there is something much more fundamental. It's not just me, but all of the analysts who have looked at this issue, aid issue, have cited repeatedly and over the past many years that the issue in making these programs, social sector development programs, be sustainable and workable are issues which are related to governance and related to administration. The governance system in Pakistan is so bad and so decayed that, if this is not the occasion to take you down to the weeds, but let me just take you one step there. Just a small issue that donors use their funding to train managers to manage programs. So these managers come from government's bureaucracy. So whoever is at that time, managing the health program or the population welfare program are the managers who we train. So we use donor funding to send them out for 6 months or to 2 years to Washington or to London and wherever. And these people then come back, and as soon as they come back, this person who has been trained to manage the population welfare program is transferred to the agriculture program somewhere or somewhere else. And I have had these conversations so many times with the government bureaucrats to say to them, and at times I have gotten into trouble with my own agency. I was working with USAID in Pakistan at that time. I got into trouble with my own agency because I said, I will hold back the funding till you, the government of Pakistan, is able to ensure that once these people come back after being trained, that at least for 6 months to a year, you will keep them in this program so that they help us manage this program. So this is a governance issue. So your point is good, that there are fundamental issues that need to be tackled before we start building these programs, which are really have no hope of sustainability because they are built completely outside of the fabric of the way that society is organized, way the bureaucracy is organized, and the way that governance is organized. So the issue of country having actually the agriculture resources or the other resources, generally I would like to say that, Pakistan is a very resource-rich country. There is minerals and there is this, that, and the other that one is constantly hearing.
I forgot to request that you state your name and affiliation before you ask your question. So let's go right here, Dennis.
Dennis Cooks here at the Wilson Center. Hi. Let's think that for a moment, let's role play. Let's say you are a congressional staffer and you have all this, U.S. congressional staffer, and you have developed all this information. And your congressman, let's say, is on the Appropriation Committee dealing with foreign aid, dealing with aid to Pakistan. What are your recommendations?
My recommendations to the congressman would be the following: that there are these very good plans on the one hand, which are developed by people who are knowledgeable and with due respect to the economists, but still they are very good plans. And on the other hand, there is these developing countries. There is Pakistan with all its mess and problems and this, that, and the other, and governance issues and religious issues and all of that. Taking these very good plans and transplanting them onto this country. Since I'm a physician, I will use a clinical analogy. It is like putting a skin graft on an area that has not been prepared. So that graft is not going to take, to use again a clinical term. That area needs to be prepared. There needs to be blood supply. It needs to be clean. It needs to be clear of infection, and then you put that graft. Okay? So there's something missing in the middle. I would suggest to the congressman, and this is a very specific recommendation. Bob is sitting here. I had recommended that Wilson Center take that responsibility and say to the congressman that we will make sure that the programs that are being developed, we will make sure that have those programs be vetted and be scrutinized and be made whole for Pakistan. And then made whole, I see you frowning, made whole in the sense that they fit into the governance and the administration and the financing of all of that. And only at that time would USAID take those programs and start implementing them. So that is what needs to be done. There needs to be some agency that takes that responsibility. An effective peer review and an effective match with the way things are, and to do it in a fashion that you do it at one level. Once that level solidifies and consolidates, then you do it at another level and keep on making it more and more sophisticated. And it is only then that you have hope for sustainability. And ironically, it is also going to be an opportunity for increasing the platform for spending. I mean, imagine if you have this solid foundation, you know, where the spending can increase, which is what most of the agents, USAID worries about that all the time, like all other development agencies.
Let's go back to women, right toward the back. Yep.
Thank you for your talk. My name is Deirdre Russo. I work at Johns Hopkins University. I think I might know the answer to my question already, but given what you're saying, you know, within some parts of the, you know, international NGO consulting firm world, there was a big kerfuffle about, you know, U.S. government focusing directly to government of Pakistan and no longer to international NGOs. Do you think that's just an academic concern or worry about, you know, the bottom line, or do you think to fund government versus international NGOs, if there's any real potential discernible difference in what could be done? Thank you.
If I've understood your question, what you are saying is that this funding of the local contractors versus the international contractors.
No, the government of Pakistan directly versus international NGOs.
I see. You know, the international donors have done that in the past. In fact, in the US government, I think also did that in the past, that there is direct budget support to the government of Pakistan. I personally think, I don't know what other things are tied to that budget support, but I don't think that the government of Pakistan should be given direct budget support to improve its health and education and social welfare sectors without it showing and demonstrating that it is able to put its two on the table. You know, the support that government of Pakistan has gotten for health and education sectors has been in many sense like direct budget support. I mean, $100 million, you know, spent by, certainly by US government from 2003 to 2007. In the education sector. You know, just recently, U.S. government funded a maternal health program worth almost $95, $96 million, which was for the health sector. So, you know, once the programs are over, the government of Pakistan's own effort is exactly where it was. What has the government done in the health sector to change its governance or its administration or its management or its personnel policies or its any of those things to make use of all of this support that was provided? None. So, you know, budget support blindly doesn't make any sense.
Let's go over here, over against the wall over here, near the very nice photograph of Woodrow Wilson, the gentleman sitting right near it. Yeah, right over there.
Thank you very much. My name is Salim, and I work at the IMF. And you aptly said, you know, with the back against the wall, that's quite true to the observation that I'm going to make. We enjoyed this wonderful articulation, but you know there are certain serious gaps in relation to factual situation, and it's an observation, and then you can react to it if you would like. First of all, the social action program is not only health. It was an umbrella project that covered four major sectors that included health and education, population welfare, education, and rural water supply and sanitation. And being an umbrella project, the World Bank actually took a lead on this. And with the donor herd mentality, all the bilaterals also got into this thing. And they created what was known as a multi-donor support unit, the MSU, and I didn't hear a mention on that. And that entity, because the major flaw with this program was that there was a design problem very correctly pointed out by the author. However, that design, and that was not made by any officials in Pakistan, it was made by the consultants and by the donors themselves. And because of the lack of capacity that they perceived, they created this multi-donor support unit, and they would go and prepare the statement of expenditures for reimbursement because this disbursement was based on first expenditure and then getting reimbursement. So there are a number of gaps in this. I don't know if you have covered that in your book or not because I haven't had a chance to read it, but from what I've heard, There are serious gaps, and it is made to look. You mentioned a number of times the taxpayers' concern overseas. The USAID money that comes to Pakistan, only 5% is budget support, and this is published information. I'm not saying it off the cuff of my hand. Only 5% is budget support. The rest of it is spent through contractors, and subcontractors, which are appointed by the aid-giving agencies. So we have to be very careful when it is being made to look as if $100 billion was given or $20 billion was given, and they have to go on. Well, somebody has to be accountable, and it is certainly not the government which has not received that in the money. That is why an observation was made that so much money has been given to Pakistanis, and why are they still have a very strange reaction towards the United States? Because the common man doesn't see that money. Where it goes, how it is spent, somebody has to be accountable. So I think I thought that I should point this thing out. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. You are absolutely right that the social action program was a huge program, had many components, and the Nancy Birdsall and her group and many other groups have extensively reviewed that program. It had one component which was a health component, and I was part of even a smaller part of the health component. However, people who have reviewed the whole program, and even the World Bank's own evaluation report, which is available on the World Bank website, says that the program was a failure. And they cite design programs, they cite oversight lapses, all of those things. So it's true that I'm talking about a small portion of it. I will go back. I want to address this notion that also you rightly said, and since I have worked in the development sector for many years, I know exactly how donor assistance works. And you said government is not responsible. I find that a little bit difficult to take. Under bilateral agreements, you know that better than I do. You are part of the IMF. I'm just a person roaming around outside. Under bilateral agreements, the government of Pakistan signs off to receive and accept this support. So the government of Pakistan is responsible. The mechanism by which that money is dispersed in the country is a matter of negotiation or agreement or not agreement, and that is exactly what I'm saying, that this is the way these programs are designed. That the host government has, maybe a lot less control, it should have more control, but to say that the government is not responsible, I totally disagree with that. The government of Pakistan is responsible. I even hold the citizens of Pakistan responsible, because they are the citizens. Their government supposedly is acting in their behalf, so they are responsible. They are answerable and responsible to the donor countries' taxpayers for utilizing their money the way it is meant to. However, that is exactly the problem. How do we do that? That is exactly the problem. How does a citizen of Pakistan get this information? I have sat in on many of the media briefings that used to be conducted when I was working with USAID. The media reporters and persons absolutely had no idea what was going on. They couldn't even ask the right questions. So how are they going to inform the public? So which is why I say that some civil society group needs to intervene on their behalf and to bring that information to the public in that fashion. So your points are in some sense well taken. Thank you.
Let's go right over here.
Bob Hathaway here at the Wilson Center. Michael, with your permission, I'm going to make just a tiny speech before I ask my question. Because this program will be watched in Pakistan, and I cannot resist pointing out that Samia is a perfect example of what the Wilson Center is trying to do with its Pakistan program. This is an important book. We were pleased to have a part in its writing and publishing. But the reason I'm saying this is because I hope that people in Pakistan will be watching this and will be inspired to contact us and to compete for appointments as Pakistan scholars in future years. You have done us proud, Dr. Altaf. I want to ask you a question now. You've made, oh, sorry, one other thing. I neglect to say, I need to say, this program would not be possible without the active support of a charitable trust based in Karachi, the Fellowship Fund for Pakistan, and I certainly want to thank this Fellowship Fund for Pakistan for making Samia's stay here and making the stay of our other scholars possible. Samia, you were very clear that you were talking about a problem which is not simply endemic to USAID, but it's a problem with international donor agencies more broadly. I, however, want to ask you a question specifically about the American Aid Dispensing Agency. I've just come back from Pakistan, and I met with USAID people there, and I have to tell you, I and my colleagues on this trip were simply blown away by the dedication and the selflessness of these people who labor under immense difficulties at great personal sacrifice. And I'm struck, we were struck then, and I've been struck for many years by the apparent contradiction between immensely talented and able and selfless people on the one hand and a agency, USAID, which frankly does not enjoy very high repute. And I'm trying to explain how this is true. I don't think it's simply, it's obviously not a function in my mind of the inadequacies of the personnel. I don't think it's simply a function of this administration or that administration, because I think most of us would agree that aid has suffered for a long time from a poor reputation. So I guess my question is, why is USAID so resistant to change? You and others have identified specific problems over a period of really decades. Why cannot or why doesn't AID respond to these criticisms in an effective manner? Why is it resistant to change? Can it change? Or should we simply blow up the entire organization and start over again?
Why is USAID resistant to change? That's a very interesting question, Bob, and one that, you know, a lot of people are grappling with. And so my 2 bits are basically, you know, large bureaucracies become entities unto themselves, and they have inertia, and they have all of those things. However, and this is very obvious by a lot of people who have written about aid programs and USAID funded programs. I think one of the crucial pieces why change does not happen is that there is basically no consequence for the managers. The incentives are the personal incentives of managers and workers at every level are completely aligned in this fashion, that they are under pressure to implement programs that can utilize the money most efficiently. By utilizing means they can spend the money as efficiently as possible. When I was working with USAID, I constantly heard the pipeline, the burn rate, the pipeline, and the burn rate. This refers to the spending, the pressure that is on the managers. The other thing that happens is, and this is also obvious for everybody to see, that there is a revolving door mechanism between USAID and its contractors. If you look at the contractors that are placed around Washington, D.C., you will find that most of the senior personnel were people who had worked in USAID for many years and have now retired and gone to work for this contractor. So that is what people, managers who are in USAID are looking at, their own future. So their incentive is aligned to work in collaboration with the contractors. And so this revolving door is a huge incentive for people to resist change. So there are many more things at the, in detail, but I personally feel, and there are a lot of people who are now talking about this also, that the incentives that people have, managers have, at the personal level, their own career, their own development, their own awards, their own advancements, you know, those are the things that are really very important to people. So, I don't think that USAID does not have a role in Pakistan. I think it does have a role in Pakistan. I think that it has a brand name and a value which has been tarnished over the years, and that has also been tarnished because if you look at what people see, the optics is very strange. They see these USAID-funded contractors, you know, who come into a city and they set up these huge fancy offices, and there are vehicles and there are equipment and there is all kinds of infrastructure support. The rents go out of the roof at once because USAID is renting this place for office space. The rents become 4 times the market rate. The salaries of people that they hire, they suck up people from various places. The salaries that they pay are 4 times or 10 times the going rate salaries. So people see that optics, and this it's like a fire hydrant opens up at once, and somebody is standing there with a cup. And you know, so there's this fire hydrant for about 3 years or 4 years, and there is huge activity going on. And most of the time, the activity, you know, at some level is also for photo ops and for you know, a superficial kind of publicity where, you know, we have fixed this health center and we have fixed this school. So for the time being, yes, the health center and the school is fixed. So our contractors fixed that health center and that school, but they are gone after 3 years. The people who lived there saw that before, saw it being fixed, and the photos being taken and big speeches being made, and then they find that once the agency is gone. I've had people, when I was working for USAID, I have had citizens say to me that, you know, it is your money. You should take control of it. It is US government money. US government should take control of this. It is not in their control. Why are they letting their contractors do all of this? You know the optics is not good. That's not what so there is a lot of negativity that USAID has brought on itself by acting like this, but the regulators, the managers will not criticize the contractors, will not hold their feet to the fire, because they are looking at their own future jobs with those organizations.
Okay, let's go right over here.
Thank you very much. I think you've raised a lot of very... Hi, how are you? Amit Pandya, U.S. Department of Labor. You've raised a lot of very painful and necessary questions. I'm very grateful to you for that. You know, I think a lot of what you've identified is issues that are common to development assistance, how we think about donor-funded development assistance across the world. Of course, much of what you've identified is also specific to Pakistan and results from its national conditions. But, you know, we could be having this discussion about development assistance in several societies. The question I wanted to put to you is whether, in the case of Pakistan, we're not also dealing with an additional, very pernicious factor. And it's something that I found also with our assistance in Afghanistan. And that is that the geostrategic and the security imperatives, in fact, mean that the effectiveness of our development assistance is not really as important a consideration. I won't say it's not a consideration, although sometimes I'm tempted to think that. But it's certainly that it's not nearly as important a consideration when we think about the value. Or perhaps another way to put it would be to say that we measure effectiveness according to very distinct criteria in this case. And so, you know, right now we see that we're now concerned about the optics of things. You know, we want a little bit more of a profile. We want the stamped, you know, the U.S. stamp a little bit more prominent. We're still not ultimately, I think, talking about effectiveness and about sustainability and all these kinds of things. So, I mean, I wonder whether this, you know, this is something that suggests that money's just going to get poured in because we have a strategic imperative to pour money in, both a political imperative at home and a strategic imperative in the world.
Amit, you've raised a very good question, which is an issue which basically we need to step back to decide, because that takes us back to the definition of aid. You know, it's very muddled. When I'm talking about aid, what am I talking about? When somebody says, you know, $1 billion a year, what are they talking about? So I think that is a very important issue that you have raised. What the citizens are looking at is the civilian aid which comes for development of the social sectors, which is really, you are right, it's a very small amount. In fact, in the last 10 years, I was looking while getting ready for this, I saw that there's almost, in the last 10 years, $20 billion has been given to Pakistan for aid by US government. And out of that, I think 3-point-some billion was civilian aid, which as a proportion is you know, very small. But there's another argument that in real terms it's quite a bit of money. So I think that definition needs to be clear. It's clearly muddled because on the one hand we say this is aid, this is for development, this is for civilian assistance, and yet at the same time US government clearly wants to win hearts and minds, which is really a political imperative. So that is a definitional thing that needs to be clarified, and I think that even in the report by the Center for Global Development, they had talked about a clarity and transparency in terms of which aid is for what purpose. And I think once that is clarified, then we need to get to the next step, that when you're saying effectiveness, what do we mean by effectiveness? Right now, if you look at the donors in Pakistan or in other developing countries, and if you go onto their websites, they have their own stories to tell that, 6,000 mothers saved from dying, and 20,000 people educated, or they got clean water and all of that. Well, is that what effectiveness is? So we need a clear definition of effectiveness. And if that definition has to have sustainability built into it, or some fundamental change that happens, then we need to spell that out for the host government. Because if we don't do that, the question that was raised over there, that government of Pakistan is responsible, but at the same time, the donors also have an ethical responsibility to really lean on the government of Pakistan as their partner to say that you've got to put your 2 on the table to make it 4. How long will the international agencies, the donors, continue to do 4 and 4 and 4? Just because or we need to be clear that it's just a geopolitical imperative, and let's just keep pouring money down, So.
Okay, let's go back. Woman in the gray, I think that's Sabira. Yep.
Sabra Qureshi, consultant. Thank you, Dr. Samia. A quick comment, if I may, and a quick question. I think this follows on from Bob's question about why USAID specifically, and perhaps the problems it has had in implementation in Pakistan. One of the things I'd say is that any donor agency needs to have effective partnerships for effective implementation, good partnerships. And one of the things that USAID has struggled with in Pakistan has been challenges to finding those partners because of the political dimensions. So I think certainly the political aspects of US assistance in Pakistan is very much part of the question about what can change and what can't, because there are those nuances which are specifically associated with USAID and are not there with any of the other agencies. My question is, hearing you talk about SAP and SAP 1 and SAP 2, they were both programs as well as projects, were almost 2 decades ago. In the period since then, in the last 2 decades or so, have you come across programs that, donor-assisted programs that you would classify as well-designed, well-implemented, that could be examples of the more successful development programs in Pakistan that could encompass the various indicators and dimensions that you talked about for effective projects? Have you come across any at all?
Actually, no, because most of the donors have function under the same framework and in the same fashion. So while there are some successes, some few successes, which remain successful for a little while longer than other programs. But actually, if you go back and look at the donor-supported programs or bank-funded, World Bank or ADB funded programs, since there is no sustainability built into those programs, they don't remain successful. They are successful for a while there is funding available. The PRSP, the Pakistan Rural Support Program, is one of the programs that is usually cited as a successful program. But if you go into the details of that program, you find that a lot of the support that should come from the government of Pakistan, for example, the salaries of the physicians, are paid by the program. So you can see very quickly that once that funding runs out, the government is not going to be able to pick up those people. There are a couple of successful development programs in Pakistan which are unfortunately for various reasons not cited. One is the Orangi pilot project in Karachi. That is completely a community-owned, community-implemented, and community developed and designed program. It took a long time because there was no pressure on the community to finish spending the money in a particular amount of time. So they took a long time. Their monitoring was very visible, being done by the community. It is one of the successful programs, water sanitation programs in Asia. So donor-supported programs, unfortunately, have not been successful. And if we don't change the thinking and the way we are looking at it, I do not think that they will be successful, regardless of the fact that USAID is now beginning to work with local contractors as prime as opposed to international contractors. I think it's just a change of putting a player playing this position versus that position. There is no game change. So now I think it is a time for game change.
Let me ask you this question, Samia. There are increasingly vocal voices, both in this country and in Pakistan, who argue that given what they describe as relatively small amounts of civilian assistance going to Pakistan, and given the presence of Chinese, Saudi, international donor civilian assistance, that Pakistan would not actually be harmed considerably if the U.S. aid program, as it now exists, were to cease. So don't mean to put you on the spot, but would just be curious to get your input on that one.
Here's what I think, Mike. I think that it is true, the U.S. assistance, civilian assistance to Pakistan as a proportion of GNP, I don't know the figures, but of course it's very small. I have a bit of a problem when people argue that, you stop U.S. assistance, we will do our own work. I mean, what stops you from doing your own work? Duh. If it is so small that it's not even going to have an impact, go do your own work. That is exactly what the donors have been saying. Go do your own work. But you are waiting for U.S. government assistance to stop so that then you can go fix your health and education sector. So which is why there is something not quite right with that argument. If you look at Saudi government assistance to the government of Pakistan, it's not altruistic. There's a lot of things tied to it that have been coming to Pakistan. I am sure Chinese assistance to Pakistan also is not completely out of love for Pakistanis. I'm sure they have, so whether USAID should cease or not in Pakistan, I think, is a question that needs to be thought out at another level. I basically am looking at the fact that USAID can be very useful in Pakistan. You know, they can be useful, US government assistance can be useful. Given that now the world is a global village and there is a strategic imperative, to me it seems that suppose Pakistan, look at the way Pakistan is going completely nuts. It's going nuttier and nuttier day by day. Suppose it just completely goes off the deep end. How can the rest of the world, we sitting in the rest of the world can say, well, you know, we've decided to wash our hands off of this. That's what it seems to me. It is very clear that for US government also, which US government has articulated very clearly, that it has a strategic imperative. So if that is the case, we might as well look it squarely in the eye and do it right.
Okay, looks like we have one more question. A gentleman in the blue shirt.
Jake Grover, Center for Global Development. I'd like to return to the first question and the issue of international migration. I detected a little bit of cynicism in your voice when you were reading from your book and describing the health director's explaining why migration policy was problematic and how there was pretty much nothing they could do about it. Michael Clemens, a colleague of mine at CGD, has just commissioned a report on migration with respect to Haiti, and is pointing out the positive influence of remittances, and which in Pakistan is to the tune of $11 billion, as well as the transfer of skills, a number of other positive externalities associated with international migration. It seems to me that the problem is with domestic policy in Pakistan, and not necessarily this idea of brain drain, which I'm not entirely convinced exists. Why is the government denying employment upon repatriation, and could you just more broadly clarify your stance with regards to international migration in Pakistan?
You know, the government denies hiring people who've come back basically because they have no, they have no jobs for them. They don't have jobs for people who are sitting inside the country. So the government's utilization capacity, when I say utilization capacity, I mean their ability to hire, to pay, to monitor, to support, to regulate these people is very poor. It has not developed that ability. It feels no need to develop that ability. There is no pressure on them to do that. They just use the donor funding to, in a sense, support their public sector programs, right? So, which is why, you know, there is this inability to, they are not hired, and also Government of Pakistan rules apply to all people who are more than 35 years of age, cannot join the government service at that time because this has implications for the retirement package. You know, these people don't have too many years left to work. That exactly is part of the governance mechanism that is applicable in Pakistan. In terms of your question that you said, transfer of skills and remittances, of course, Pakistan is surviving to a large extent. You know, the remittances are almost $1 billion a month or a year. I'm forgetting now. A month, yeah, huge amount of money. And you know, I remember when I was in medical school when Zulfikar Ali Bhutto became the Prime Minister of Pakistan. And I remember him announcing and at that time Pakistan had no private medical colleges. They were all government funded medical colleges. And the doctors, and we all, you know, were basically studied on the taxpayers' dime. And Zulfikar Ali Bhutto announced at that time that we will open private medical colleges and export doctors. Of course, you know, if that is the national policy, that this is a commodity that you want to export to earn foreign exchange, you know, then say that that's the policy. In terms of transfer of skills, if you look at the past 20 or 30 years of people who go out and bring skills back to Pakistan, it's been almost zero. It's been almost zero. Again, because Pakistan government does not create the environment where these people can work. I can cite you an example of recently USAID funded actually an epidemiology training program, which funded by USAID and trained by CDCs. You know, I think we trained, Bob is right here, I think he would be able to tell me, I'm forgetting the numbers, maybe 10 or 12 or certain number of epidemiologists. I don't know for sure, but I can speculate because even while these people were undergoing training, they were looking for opportunities to work outside. But I can speculate that it would be very interesting to find out that how many of those trained epidemiologists are doing the work in Pakistan that they are trained to do. The National Institutes of Health in Islamabad, Pakistan does not have any bench space or any bench support to provide to these people. So yes, theoretically, these people have transferable skills which they can bring back to the country. But it would also be interesting to see that people who have gone on a Fulbright program to United States or somewhere or have gone on other scholarship programs, how many of them have gone back to work in Pakistan? Because for a scientist or for somebody to go back to work in Pakistan, they need a kind of infrastructure support that is not available in the country. That is not to say that there are not private pockets in Pakistan and some private institutions which really provide that kind of a support. But is that what government policy is? I hold the government responsible for developing that infrastructure where it can provide the opportunities and utilize the trained manpower that it has.
Well, we've reached the end of the line, so let's all give a round of applause for Samia. Okay.